Let's start by bowing in. So welcome once again, everyone, to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. We're all awakening, threading this path. We are working our way right now, having finished volumes 1 and 2 of the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. We're working our way through Shambhala, the Sacred Path of the Warrior, by Trungpa Rinpoche. And we're up to chapter 11, which is on Nowness. And then we're going to do chapter 12, Discovering Magic. And these are very profound chapters. Tonight, Michael is going to start.
So I'll also say welcome to everyone. And I'd like to begin by pointing out that we're entering a different section of the book, that the overall section that these chapters are in is titled The Warrior's World. And I think with that, we'll discover and be reading about some themes that kind of pervade all of Shambhala training. The first is the importance of bringing practice to everyday life and to everyday situations, that we may create in our minds a conceptual boundary between meditative, spiritual practice, Buddhist practice, whatever we might call it, and the rest of our lives. But in fact, what's important is bringing the practice into all aspects of our life. And with that, not rejecting anything as being somehow unworthy of bringing our attention to it. The second thing is that we'll be hearing more, I think, about the notion of enlightened society, and in particular, how we relate to others, with emphasizing kindness, compassion, gentleness, interest in others altogether. And then the third is that there'll be even more exploration of the themes of environment in two ways. One is how we relate to the environment, how our state of mind affects what we see as our environment, but also how environment affects us. So that some of the things that we've talked about in other weeks, for instance, about Trungpa Rinpoche elegantizing people and having formal balls and all kinds of other things, were ways in which the environment could reflect back to us our basic goodness, our wakefulness. So I think these are themes that we'll see throughout these chapters that we're about to read. And the chapter I'm going to be talking about was titled Nowness. And at first blush is kind of a surprise, because he really doesn't start talking explicitly about nowness till near the end of the chapter. And in fact, begins talking about the moment we're born, which is as far back in the past as any of us can get. But as we read through this chapter, I think we'll see that the theme of nowness really does pervade everything that he talks about. In any case, he begins with, from the moment we're born, we're separate individuals. We have attachments, of course, but as we grow older, our attachments decrease, and we become increasingly independent and separate. And he says, in this journey through our life, we must overcome the neurotic attachment of being the child of somebody. In other words, at some point, we need to be our own people. We need to wake up and not simply repeat whatever habitual patterns we may have internalized, in whatever roles we may have internalized, but actually realize that we're separate people. And he says that the principles of warriorship that we discussed in part 1 of this book are connected with how individuals can develop personal discipline so that they become mature and independent, and therefore experience a sense of personal freedom. So that's what we've been talking about in the previous chapters, where we talked about discovering basic goodness, touching the tender, open heart of sadness, synchronizing body and mind through meditation practice, recognizing the nature of fear and discovering our ability to go beyond fear to fearlessness, something about the cocoon, and renunciation and daring and letting go. So all of those chapters on all of those themes are really important in terms of accomplishing exactly what he said, developing personal discipline so that we can become mature and independent and therefore experience a sense of personal freedom. If we were trying to connect with the Buddhist path, we could say this is a little bit consistent with the Hinayana approach. But now, he says, it's becoming equally important to share the comradeship of human society, which involves relating to others. And so, and he says that this is actually a greater expression or organic expression of the greater vision of warriorship. And he says it's based on an appreciation of the larger world. So we're expanding our vision, we're expanding our view. We are increasingly able to be open to the world around us. And he says with this, we naturally feel a deep fellowship with our fellow human beings, and that's the real basis for helping others and making a genuine contribution to society. So seeing more and more of the social theme, how we relate to the world, how we relate to others in a wakeful way, becomes increasingly important as we move along. Just as our connection to other human beings and our concern for their welfare have to be manifested personally, practically, but just abstractly thinking about that isn't enough. And he then says that the most practical and immediate way to begin sharing with others and working for their benefit is to work with our own domestic situation and expand from there. So, he says, an important step in becoming a warrior is to become a family person. An important part of becoming a warrior is to become a family person. Someone who respects their everyday domestic life and is committed to uplifting that situation, whatever our sense of family might be. He says we can't help society purely on the basis of vision, and talks about all the different ways that over the course of history, people have tried to organize society in different ways: democracy, rule by elite, and so on. But he says whatever they are, however things are organized, they have to be integrated with an individual person's experience of domestic life. Otherwise, there ends up being a big gap between grand vision and the reality of everyday experience. So hidden within that, and it will come up again later in this chapter, is again the themes that we talked about other week about heaven and earth, the notion of heaven as possibility, potentiality, openness, and earth as practicality, and how we bring things to bring things to life, how we bring things to fruition. So when there's a gap between vision and practicality, it becomes a problem. And he talks about the traditional nuclear family and all of the problems that may come up with that, relationship problems, money problems, and so on. But he says that it's important that we respect life on that mundane level, because the only way to implement our vision for society is to bring it down to the immediate situation of a single household. And he says, so he's really talking about, again, how we relate to people in our immediate environment, whatever that might be, whether we're in a family or whether with friends, however it might be, although clearly the family was very important to him, and the notion of family and household was very much part of the Shambhala teachings. But it really comes down to how we relate to others. And in regard to the family in particular and those ideas here, I have to say that what he's talking about in terms of the family as the base for creating an enlightened society really reminded me of all things the I Ching, or the Book of Changes. I don't know how familiar people are with the I Ching. It's a Chinese text that's quite ancient. One of the few ancient texts that's actually survived book burnings around the world, ancient texts. Trungpa Rinpoche used to use the I Ching on Shambhala Day to, as part of divination for the upcoming year. But there's also a great deal of philosophy in the I Ching, and I just want to read a few sentences from the hexagram for the family, because I think it goes right along with what he's describing here in terms of the importance of the family. So in the I Ching, it says, the family shows the laws operative within the household that, transferred to outside, keep the state and the world in order. The influence that goes out from within the family is represented by the symbol of the wind created by fire. When the family is in order, all the social relationships of humanity will be in order. The family is a society in embryo. It is the native soil on which performance of moral duty is made easy through natural affection and love that is later widened to include human relationships in general. So I think this is what he's talking about in regard to the family, that at least a healthy family, that where relationships are characterized by love and respect and mutuality. And that this becomes the ground then for how society can grow from there. Trungpa Rinpoche also says that becoming a family person means taking pride in the wisdom of your family heritage. And that from a Shambhala point of view, respecting your family and your upbringing has nothing to do with separating yourself from others and becoming arrogant about your ancestry. Rather, it's based on realizing that the structure and experience of family life actually reflects the deep-seated wisdom of a culture. I'll say that again. It's based on realizing that the structure and experience of family life actually reflects the deep-seated wisdom of a culture. So I think exactly what that means is really personal to each one of us, in terms of our situation. Everybody's family situation is different, and some people come from very difficult family situations. But I think the point is to reflect back and see what wisdom there might be, what strength there might be that we can take, however that situation might have been. It does not mean that we ignore problems and difficult situations that may have occurred, but realizing the wisdom that might be there. He says that wisdom has been passed down to you, and it's actually present in our everyday domestic life. He says, by appreciating our family tradition, we're opening ourselves further to the richness of the world. So in this also, there's a sense of not rejecting things out of hand, but actually showing appreciation for what's there, whatever that might be. And he goes into a great deal of detail about his own family heritage. It's quite a story about his life in Tibet, how he was born in a cowshed, but went to a monastery at a young age and was always known as Trungpa Rinpoche, but that his mother accompanied him to the monastery. And he would ask her, what's my name? What is our name? And his mother was a very humble person, it sounds like. But finally one time said, let him know that his family name was Mukpo. And she saw herself as inferior, which was painful to read, but was able to say, this is who you are, this is who we are. And he kept the family name, the Mukpo family name, as his identity and pride. He also said, and I think this is important too, in terms of recognizing the deep-seated wisdom of a culture and appreciating family tradition, opening ourselves further to the richness of the world. He said, my mother was a very gentle person, never did anything aggressive, was always accommodating and kind to others. And he emphasizes, I learned a great deal about the principles of human society from the wisdom of my mother. So I think, just again, my mother was a very gentle person, never did anything aggressive, was always accommodating and kind to others. He says in modern times, emphasis has shifted away from the family as the focus of society. In an earlier time, the focus for family was more on survival and mutual support and aid. That as in more modern times, we moved away from the grandparents' wisdom, as he says. This no longer needed and doesn't have a role to play. And that old people end up in old age homes or retirement communities, and occasionally they come to visit their grandchildren and watch how nicely they play. Which I think it's really interesting, I think, to reflect on some of that section of the book and think about how different the culture Trungpa Rinpoche came from and what wisdom and sanity there is in that culture. Even for all that it may be primitive in other ways, that there's a great deal of wisdom and the kindness and that was displayed in that society. It was also interesting to me because I actually happened to read an article recently in The Atlantic about problems with the nuclear family. And what it really emphasizes is the breakdown of the extended family and the difficulties that family faces now because there isn't that mutual aid, mutual support, and diffusion of stress and all of the things that the extended family situation provided. So again, it's just something to think about in our extended family here as Sangha. In any case, he says in some societies, people set up shrines to venerate their ancestors, and that we might think these are primitive, but in fact, veneration of the ancestral lineage can be a sign of respect for the accumulated wisdom of our culture. And he says it's really necessary to appreciate that for thousands of years, human beings have been collecting wisdom. And I think some value in reflecting on that is, first of all, again, just recognizing our interdependence with other people and over time. And also, as if we think in that way, we have more, I think it helps to reduce our arrogance, perhaps, to realize that, to feel that kind of appreciation for the wisdom that we have been granted, that is there in how people, how we function as a society, for all the problems that exist. And he goes into this. We should appreciate the accomplishments of our ancestors, how they developed knives, learned how to cut down trees, cook food, that such wisdom has to be respected, that it's not a setting sun approach at all, and that the failure to appreciate the resourcefulness of human existence, which we call basic goodness, has become one of the world's biggest problems. Again, the failure, that's an interesting sentence to contemplate. The failure to appreciate the resourcefulness of human existence, which we call basic goodness, has become one of the world's biggest problems. And I think there are a lot of ways that we might think about approaching what that means, but one of them will come up with what we're about to talk about, which is Nowness, which was the title of the chapter to begin with. So he says, venerating the past in itself won't solve the world's problems. We need to find the link between our traditions and our present experience. Nowness, or the magic of the present moment, is what joins the wisdom of the past with the present. And he says, when we appreciate a painting, a piece of music, a work of literature, no matter when it was created, we appreciate it now. We experience the same nowness in which it was created. So that again, we're talking about wakefulness in our present life and wakefulness in larger society as well. That there is a basic goodness in society as a whole, as it may sometimes be obscured in us, it may be obscured at times in the culture as well, but that there is something there, something fundamentally good. And he talks about this again in terms of the resourcefulness of human existence. Anyway, he says the way to experience nowness is to realize that this very moment, this very point in our lives is always the occasion. So that's right now. That's how we can experience nowness. It's not something that we need to go look far and wide for. It's right here, right now. And yet, how often we miss it. How little of our lives we actually spend in an experience of nowness. So the consideration of where you are and what you are on the spot is very important. This is one reason why your family situation, your domestic everyday life is so important. He says, we should regard our home as sacred, as a golden opportunity to experience nowness. This is very much like what we talked about in one of the last two chapters about no matter what our situation, even if we have, a fairly humble apartment, we could still regard it as a palace, our palace. And this isn't come out of like a fantasy or hallucination. It's purely appreciation, just appreciation of the ground of our living situation and approaching our living situation, making the best of it that we can, whatever that might be. He says, appreciating nowness begins very simply by taking an interest in all the details of our lives. And this interest is simply applying awareness to what goes on in our everyday life. Awareness while we're cooking, driving, changing diapers, even while we're arguing. That's awareness. And he says, and this is another important sentence, I think, such awareness can help free us from speed, chaos, neurosis, and resentment of all kinds. It can free us from the obstacles to nowness so that we can cheer up on the spot all the time. And this is exactly what he meant in one of the chapters we read last week when he talked about the echo of awareness coming back to us, that we can just wake up, let go, and be open on the spot. And he goes on to say, nowness is also important in establishing an enlightened society. He asked the question, how can we know that what we're doing is authentic and good? And the only answer is nowness. Now is the important point. Now is where we can bring together vision and practicality. If we're unable to experience now, then he says, we're corrupted because we're looking for another now, which is impossible. There's only this now. When corrupt, and he says this affects cultures as well, that when culture ceases to be now, it becomes past and future. And the periods in history of great art, learning, advances in learning, or spreading peace, all happen, we're all now. And he says we have to maintain our nowness so that we don't corrupt now. Enlightened society must rest on a good foundation. And the nowness of our family situation, the nowness of our everyday life, the nowness of the environment that we find ourselves in is that foundation. From that, you can expand. By regarding our home as sacred, we can enter into domestic situations with awareness and delight. And he says it might seem that washing dishes, cooking dinner are completely mundane activities. But if we apply awareness to any situation, then we're training our whole being so that we'll be able to open ourselves further rather than narrowing our existence. And we may have all kinds of hassles and problems. It may seem that that vision and ordinary life are opposing each other, but vision and practicality can be joined with nowness. And he concludes by saying that people think solving problems involves conquering the earth rather than touching the earth. If you remember, again, this was in the readings from last week, how the Buddha expressed his meditative awareness when he was asked, how do we know you're enlightened? This is, he said, this was the equivalent of us learning to hold our seat in meditation practice and not being swayed by ups and downs of life. When the Buddha was asked, how do we know you're enlightened? He touched the earth and said, this very earth is my witness. So conquering is setting sun mentality. We're trying to conquer the earth so we can avoid reality. And it goes into all the things we do, again, to kind of seal ourselves in an imaginary world. Deodorant spray so we don't smell the real world, processed food so we don't eat anything, don't taste raw ingredients. But he says Shambhala vision is based on living on this earth, the real earth, touching the earth, not trying to create a fantasy world. That we can learn how to live on this earth. We can learn to experience sacredness, the nowness of reality. So with that, I'll turn it over to John. Right now.
Thank you, Michael. And reading this, I remember all the things he did to try and shape us into enlightened society. Beginning before he even introduced the Shambhala teachings, he got all of us to start marrying each other and having children and getting jobs and starting businesses. And all us hippies with the long hair and hippie clothes, like the pygmies with their leather clothes and bone-handled knives and pot pipes and all that, we got everybody into business wearing suits and ties, creating enlightened society, having parties, entertaining each other, creating a society here in Boulder, where I was living, and in other places where his students congregated. So it's kind of like he took us, this was the 60s, counterculture time. People who were furious with the way the United States had developed and gone into Vietnam. And people were taking drugs, and Timothy Leary. I watched an episode of a show I can't really recommend myself, but it's by Michael Pollan, whose book on food I liked a lot. It's all about awareness, consciousness, LSD, and he shows Leary, and telling people to tune in, drop out. And Jim Rinpoche was telling people, tune in and drop in. Become part of society. Respect your tradition, your parents. Know their failings, of course, but to appreciate the wisdom of the lineage in which we have been born and raised. And there was tremendous emphasis on people going back to their roots. And I remember he gave a seminar on American karma. There was a line that I've never forgotten in that seminar. He looked at all of us, all these hippies, and people who are counterculture, leading American culture and society. And he said, you're all trying to find a way out, but it's not a matter of finding the way out. It's a matter of finding the way in. That really, I think, summed it up. And that was very early. And he just kept doing it on and on and on, including in Shambhala, establishing the Shambhala monarchy, of which he was the monarch, living in a court where people came to serve and participate in the court. One minute you're a servant, the next minute you're a guest. It just went on, and people dressing continually. I remember getting my first sport coat and tie back on. I'd gone to a school where you had to wear a sport coat and tie every day to school. And I hadn't worn it in years. And suddenly there it was again. We were all doing it. So this is creating Shambhala society. Appreciation now for who we are, what we've come from, and where we're going in a creative, generous, appreciative way, rather than acting out of anger and sorrow and unhappiness. Now, chapter 12, he's beginning to actually drill down into how this happens in our minds. It's called Discovering Magic. And I can't tell you how profound I find this chapter now, after all these years. It's as though I never saw it before. He's talking about, in this chapter altogether, about how with the mind of meditation, the mind which cuts through thoughts about the past and the future, these distracting, entertaining, painful thoughts, and coming into awareness in this present moment, there is magic to be discovered. That magic grows the more we learn how to rest in awareness now, with gentleness, with kindness, cutting through what he used to call neurotic speed. Neurotic speed is, it's like you're on a treadmill and you're full of anxiety and you've got to keep your feet moving because you're afraid if you stop, you're going to fall over. The treadmill will keep moving and you won't. And he talked a lot about that. It's really the action of anxiety. And this discovering magic has to do with cutting that neurotic speed. So he starts out by saying, in modern society, the appreciation of simplicity has almost been lost. Almost been lost. Because we're trying to create comfort and pleasure from speed, neurotic speed, technology, all kinds of foods, the increasing population, more and more cars, gadgets, social media, everything, which keeps our minds distracted and in the past and in the future, lost in thought, in neurotic speed. He says computers, processed, unhealthy food, casual, sloppy dress. My gosh. I remember as a child being put in a coat and tie when I was taken on an airplane. You know, that's what you did. You put on a coat and tie when you got on the airplane. I mean, today, look what today, everybody who wears a coat and tie, hardly, anybody, very few people. Talk about sloppy dress. Lack of care of the environment. Well, we're living in it right now. Ozone layer depletion, everything. Overpopulation. God, since he wrote this in 1970, the population of the planet has doubled. And since, well, it just goes on and on. I keep harping on that one. It's outrageous, the overpopulation. Lack of care in the environment, overpopulation, more lack of deep values, lack of love of life, pursuit of pleasure and entertainment, constantly looking for that next distraction, that next TV show that's going to take us away from our anxiety, that next dinner out with friends, alcoholism, drug use, everything. All the things that we do and we fight. In this chapter, what he's talking about is that there is a magic to be discovered in coming back into this present moment. It's the magic of the real world. I think of artificial intelligence. I wrote to myself on the margin, what's his name? Harari. Noah Yuval Harari talks about how in the future, one of the big problems is going to be, what are you going to do with all these unemployed people? Because AI has taken away their jobs. And who's going to feed them? And how are they going to be governed and all that? We're moving into a kind of technological, inhuman environment. He says the goal of warriorship is to connect to the nowness of reality so that you can go forward without destroying simplicity, without destroying your connection to this earth. This is the point of nowness. And it's more than that. Nowness is about reality, about what's real, as opposed to the dreams of the past and the future, which are so full of anxiety and which dominate our lives and our cultures. He says, in this chapter, we're going to discuss the ground of nowness. In order to rediscover nowness, you need to look back into your own mind to before thinking and history began. Thought before thought ever occurred. This is the whole thing, I keep doing this. It's a matter of pointing out that we have this state of mind right now, all of us here. So many people doing it in this, as you look at this screen. Clear, open awareness. This is what he's talking about. This clear, open awareness, devoid of thought, devoid of anxiety, devoid of hope and fear. It's just awareness. Awareness of what? Awareness of sights, sounds, smells, tastes, bodily sensations, and mental events that we're aware of it all. And when we become aware of it, we're no longer caught up in the dream of the past and the future, the neurotic speed. So the task that we all have is to begin to develop a different kind of habit, or to break a habit, the habit of neurosis, the habit of anxiety, and the way it drives us into mental activity, and to come back to be able to rest gently in open awareness. This is the core of all Buddhist teaching. And it's especially so here in the Shambhala teachings, where he's talking about this recovering now, rediscovering nowness. He says this original state of being can be likened to a primordial or cosmic mirror. And I guess, when we lead meditation, those of us who do, and we talk about resting in this simple awareness in which the six knowables arise and pass away, and we use the analogy, the traditional analogy of these six knowables, sight, sound, smell, taste, all the rest, being like images in a mirror. That's the analogy for mind. And this mind is the cosmic mirror. It's cosmic because it has no beginning and end. It's always here. It's primordial because it was always here. Other things seem to have beginnings and ends, like these words, but they just arise and pass away as images passing through the cosmic mirror. We are in the cosmic mirror. Read that beginning page in the Shambhala, the Path of the Warrior again, where he quotes from the text. This is that Terma text, the letter of the Black Ashe. And he talks about how in the cosmic mirror, warriors arose and confused beings arose. And the warriors built beautiful castles and farmed and produced amazing food and fed each other and were ever kind to each other. And the cowards that arose ate each other's flesh because they weren't living in this primordial cosmic mind. But this is the cosmic mirror he's talking about. It's reality. Isn't that wild? It's reality. That this is actually what we're in. We think we're in a world that has a beginning and an end. And what this is saying is we are in the cosmic mirror. It has no beginning or end. It's never started and stopped. It's primordial. It was always there before time. So you can't even say it was always there, really. It's magic. And he's leading us into this world of magic. The primordial mirror, which reflects anything from gross to refined, while still remaining just what it is, just like a mirror. A mirror can reflect a dog shit. It can reflect Van Gogh's aural. It can reflect anything, and it remains just what it is. That's this space of awareness that we inhabit, in which everything arises and passes away. And we're being enjoined to live in this space and to appreciate the beauty of these arisings and passings. He says, how to experience the cosmic mirror? Simply relax. You relax your awareness into now. Any effort takes you out of it. You relax and you come back. He says it's different from the setting sun notion of flopping, like, oh gosh, I'm going to get a rest. I think I'll go, have a drink and have a nap, and that's different from that. This is relaxing into awareness. He says this is relaxing the mind, letting go of the anxiety and concepts and depression that normally bind you through the practice of meditation. Meditation isn't meant to be an exercise in cultivating peace, like you're going to meditate on some object, like the breath or a mantra or something, and you still your mind and go into some kind of peaceful trance state. Meditation is awareness, the tuning in and becoming the awareness of this primordial mirror in which everything, including us, is arising and passing now. He says, in part one, we discussed how the practice of meditation, what we're talking about here, is connected to renouncing small-mindedness and personal territory. In meditation, you're neither for nor against your experience. Once you do that, you're back in thought and little dreams, anxious dreams. You take an unbiased approach. You let things be as they are. You see them as they are, which is to see them accurately, with kindness, with gentleness, with respect. but accurately, without judgment, which is inaccurate. Then you're laying a trip. He says, you yourself learn to be. That's what this whole thing is about. We are learning how to just be without judgment, non-conceptually. That is the ideal state of relaxation, which allows you to experience the nowness of the cosmic mirror. In fact, it is already the experience of the cosmic mirror, this relaxed awareness, and we can all do it. And if you think you can't, that's just more self-delusion. That's just another entertainment. That's making it into something bigger, or what's the word, not even bigger. It's making it into something neurotic so that I can pursue it with my speed. If you say, oh, I can't do that, you just come back. Here it is. It's here all the time. If you're able to relax looking at a cloud or drop of rain and experience its genuineness, then you can see the unconditionality of reality, which remains very simply in things as they are, very simply. Things are unconditional because they're changing so fast, you can't even talk about what it was that changed. This gesture, these words, your attention, everything. It's massive. We think, oh, I'm looking now at Steve. Oh, I'm looking at my computer screen. Oh, I'm aware of the sound of my voice. There is a infinite multiplicity of things going on in any instant. And we just focus in on one or two little things and make them into a world, make them into a project, make them into a drama. If you're able to view things without thought of whether they are for you or against you, including yourself, by the way, viewing yourself that way, whether or not you can go along with them, then you are experiencing the state of being of the cosmic mirror, the wisdom of the cosmic mirror. This is viewing things without thought of whether they are for you or against you. This is the cosmic mirror. You can see anything, a fly, a snowflake, a water ripple. You can look at those things with simple, ordinary, but appreciative perception. You experience vast realms of perception unfolding, limitless. So much so that perception itself is primordial, even beyond thought. I mean, isn't it? This perception of these visions, of these that we're having right now, these sounds that are hitting your ears, they're beyond thought. They just happen. You don't have to do anything. He says, there are so many perceptions that they are beyond imagination. Though we are so blasé, we barely notice how limitless they are. Endless fields of perception of this and that. In any moment, we're just looking at a little part of it, noticing a little part of it, but the rest of it is there too. Interactions between consciousness, the sense organs, and the objects of perception. He says in secular Shambhala tradition, the sense perceptions, sights, sounds, smells, all the rest, are regarded as sacred, basically good, a source of wisdom. And he's getting to the magic here. And he says now, because of the extraordinary vastness of perception, the vastness of it, you have possibilities of communicating with the depth of the world of sense perceptions, the greater world. In other words, your sense perceptions give you access to possibilities of deeper perception. These sense perceptions are doorways into this magical world of deeper perception, which we normally don't notice because we're so absorbed in our anxious thoughts. Beyond ordinary perception, there is super sound, super smell, and super feeling existing in your state of being. These can be experienced only by training yourself in the depth of meditation practice, coming back to now, which clarifies any confusion or cloudiness and brings out the precision, sharpness, and wisdom of perception, the nowness of your world. This is the only way to get to this super sound, super smell, and super feeling. And what he's talking about is that there are moments, especially when one begins to enter into this world, the world of, you might call it magic, the Shambhala world, when you are stunned by the beauty, by the intensity, by the vividness of the sense perceptions in a way that can't happen when one is lost in anxious dreaming. Walking down the street, dreaming, gotta get some lunch, dreaming, gotta pay my bills, dreaming. Somebody doesn't like me, dreaming. He says in meditation practice, you experience the breath going in and out, and it is so sharp and good. It brings out the supernatural, if I may use that word. You don't see ghosts or become telepathic. We're not talking about that. But your perceptions become supernatural, simply supernatural, vivid. There's a vividness, and I know people here have experienced it. It comes to us in between thoughts, in flashes sometimes for longer periods of time. And if you haven't experienced it, don't feel bad. That's just another way of not experiencing it. Then you can beat yourself up. Oh, I'm a terrible meditator. Oh, I'll never get this. That's another good block. He says, normally we fit our perceptions into repetitive stories we tell about our lives. That's a good way of going to sleep. I see dirt, so it is time to clean the house. I smell food, so it is time to be hungry and eat. I see a face I know, and it arouses familiar feelings of aggression or affection or whatever. So all repetitive, limited, predictable also. We shut out any vastness or possibilities of deeper perception out of our hearts by fixating on our own interpretation of phenomena of the senses. But it is possible to go beyond personal interpretation and to let the vastness into our hearts through the medium of perception. And we do this, you can call it meditation if you like. This goes beyond any normal early beginning idea of what meditation is. But it's really what meditation is. He says we can limit our perception so that we close off vastness, or we can allow vastness to touch us. And how do we do that? By coming present. By simply relaxing into this awareness with gentleness and seeing what is here in the world. It's easier to do in natural settings. I'll say this, he doesn't talk about this in this chapter, but he has in other places. It's easier to do this when you're in contact with nature than when you're walking down the city streets of Manhattan or similar. But it can happen anywhere. He says, when we draw down the power and depth of vastness into a single perception, then we are discovering and invoking magic. Not unnatural power over the phenomenal world. This isn't like learning how to fly or turning lead into gold, but rather the discovery of innate or primordial wisdom in the world as it is. Wisdom without beginning, the wisdom of the cosmic mirror that we are all in right now. And this is Drala, this magical quality of existence. The word Drala is introduced here. Dra means enemy, la means above or to conquer. So above the enemy, beyond the enemy, it is the unconditional wisdom and power of the world that are beyond any dualism. So you could say it's the magic of that pine tree, of that cloud, of that drop of rain, is Drala. Sometimes Drala takes the form of living beings that can appear as well. He doesn't get to that in this chapter, but he will at some point. Or what seem to be living beings. but it's really the power of nature speaking to us. Drala is above any enemy or conflict. It is wisdom beyond aggression. It is the self-existing wisdom and power of the cosmic mirror that are reflected both in us and in our world of perception as it is. And this is a key point. It's not that I, perceive this wisdom there. It's everywhere. We are one with it. We are in it. We are of it. This world of phenomena. You can't separate out the phenomena as they arise and pass away from awareness of them. In fact, even to speak of awareness of phenomena is to give it a dualism it doesn't have. It's all completely integrated. One experience, this experience right now, everything is arising and passing in awareness. And there is no one being aware of something. It's a constant changing presentation. You say, well, if I close my eyes, I stop being aware. No. If the eyes close, the world just has changed, gone dark, with you in it. It's this unity. He says the key point in discovering Drala principle, realizing that your own wisdom as a human being, your awareness, your intelligence, is not separate from the power of things as they are, what we call the world. Your own wisdom is not separate. It's integrated with this. They are both reflections of the unconditional wisdom of the cosmic mirror that we are in, ineluctably. We think, oh, I understand this, I don't understand that. Meanwhile, we are utterly integrated and part of this cosmic mirror of intelligence in which everything, what seems to be internal, what seems to be external, all these things are arising and passing away in this mirror of intelligence. Therefore, there is no fundamental separation or duality between you and your world. You find that they are inherently connected to your own vision, your own being. That is discovering magic. We are not talking here about an intellectual revelation. We are speaking of actual experience in the moment. We're not talking about some kind of intellectual understanding that you can read in this book and you can take it and sort of frame it and put it on your refrigerator or something like that. We're talking about what is happening now. The discovery of Drala may come as an extraordinary smell, a fantastic sound, a vivid color, an unnatural taste. Any perception can connect us to reality properly and fully. What we see doesn't have to be pretty particularly. There is some principle of magic in everything. Something living, something real is taking place in everything. He says, it just goes on. Well, this is interesting here too. He says, we appreciate all sides of reality properly. Leaves blown by the wind, rocks wet from the rain. We see how things display their harmony and their chaos at the same time. Many children's stories and poems describe the experience of invoking magic of a simple perception. Vastness is expressed in simplicity. Why children's poems? Because when we are young, we are much more in touch with this magical world than as we grow older. As we grow older, we get lost in the stories and the conceptual systems, in the experiences of love and hate and fear and resentment, that a child is much closer to this. They've come out. In fact, babies are born at about the third skanda. That means they haven't really developed concepts yet. You know, you watch a baby begin to develop concepts, the first words, right? Whatever they might be, milk, mama, who knows what. Before that, they have no words, so they have no conceptual systems with which to dull out the world yet. They're seeing the world much more vividly. It's still I and other in an infant, but there's no idea of I and other. There's no word for it. They're just experiencing it impulsively. So children are much closer to this realm of magic than adults. And that's why he talks about A Child's Garden of Verses by Robert Louis Stevenson, especially the poems My Shadow and My Kingdom and Armies in the Fire. He talks about the Little Prince. Don't we love the Little Prince? It was so vivid and magical. The fox, who says, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." And that isn't quite the language of these teachings, but it's getting at it anyhow. It's how we actually see. When we see this magic, it's with the heart, the beauty and the meaning of this present moment. And I am thinking of a poem that I've loved for years. William Wordsworth's Ode, Intimations of Immortality, from recollections of early childhood. And I've known this poem for years, and I loved it so much I memorized the first two quatrains, and I'll give them to you. It's a long poem, and it's full of amazing lines like "Splendor in the Grass." Remember the movie with Natalie Wood? Now that's in there, all kinds of things. I see George nodding. Yes. So here's the first two quatrains of that poem, more or less. I might screw up a word or two. There was a time when heaven, earth, and man, the world, and every common sight to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the substance of a dream. It is not now as it hath been of yore. Turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen I now can see no more. The rainbow comes and goes, and lovely is the rose. The moon doth with delight look down upon her heavens bare. The waters on a starry night are beautiful and fair. The sunshine is a glorious birth, and yet I know, where'er I go, that there hath passed away a glory from the earth. He's talking just about this magic that children are much more attuned to than adults. And he's talking about his childhood, intimations of immortality from reflections on early childhood. And it goes on and on. It's just beautiful. But it's not as good as those first two quatrains, which I misquoted a little bit, because the first line goes, there was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight to me did seem apparelled in celestial light. He's describing the magic. So, discovering Drala is to establish ties to your world so that each perception becomes unique. And he says, and this is a quote, is to see with the heart what is invisible to the eye, the living magic of reality. And then he says, seeing one drop of water can be seeing all water, can be seeing the oceans. He says Drala is almost an entity, not on the level of gods, but it is an individual strength that does exist. We can actually experience it. There are Dralas in earth, rocks or trees, mountains or snowflake, clod of dirt. This is why it's more available to us in nature. If you live in New York, go to Central Park and practice your meditation there. Welcome the Drala. They're there. Says, when you make connection with the elemental quality of the world, you are meeting Dralas on the spot. We always have possibilities of discovering magic. And he says that he's experienced it a lot in flower arranging. Oh, I've got that downstairs picture of him flower arranging. He became a flower arranging master, received a degree in it when he was studying at Oxford. And he took it way beyond what he learned there. He used to do installations, big things, filling galleries. But he was an artist. Because you see, in art, there is this magic. The artist, a true artist, is seeing with this eye of Drala, with this eye of magic, and expressing it in their art. He says that wisdom abides in the cosmic mirror here. By relaxing the mind, you can reconnect with that primordial original ground, which is completely pure and simple. So effort, if you're exercising effort, it's not going to do it. You relax into this awareness with gentleness, with appreciation, with kindness. They're key to recognizing the cosmic mirror, to seeing Drala. Out of that, through the medium of your perception, you can discover magic or Drala. You can connect with your own intrinsic wisdom, with a sense of greater wisdom or vision beyond you. And this wisdom, isn't it wild? It's not a matter of understanding how things work, or, if you do A, then you get B, and you get C, and it's not this thing. This wisdom is about appreciation of the magical quality with which phenomena arises and passes away. Finally, he says, you might think that something extraordinary will happen to you when you discover magic. Something extraordinary does happen. You simply find yourself in the realm of utter reality, complete and thorough reality. So, and this isn't just Shambhala. This is the world of Tantra, of Vajrayana as well. Michael talked about the wisdom of the I Ching, Book of Changes. There are 12 what are called Jing in Chinese culture. There are 12 usually translated as classics. I only know a little bit about the Book of Changes, the I Ching, and the Book of Li, which is the Book of Ritual. And it was said that a good emperor of China studied the Book of Li, the rituals, because these rituals joined heaven and earth. And what that means is to join heaven and earth is to bring wisdom and the earth together, which is what Trungpa Rinpoche is talking about here. And when an emperor could do that, to join them through the practice of holy ritual, and it's holy only because it brings together heaven and earth, then there would be peace and prosperity in the kingdom. And when the emperor failed to do that, there would be chaos and pain and suffering. A great example then of these periods of pain and suffering were the regime changes that China went through periodically, when they would go Mongols, non-Chinese would come in and take over, and then they would be thrown out. And supposedly the regime changes were always when the emperors lost track of the magic of joining wisdom and earth together. So I'll stop there and we could have a discussion. So yeah, we ended the good time this time. This is beautiful, magical stuff, I think. But anyhow. Ed, you have your hand raised.
Yes, first of all, it's hard to imagine John Baker with long hair. If that's not an illusion, I don't know what is. But the thought occurred to me that as living in the human condition, we're subject to a constant tension um, uh, between our sense perceptions and our attempt to see them in a bigger context, if you will. And I mean, I go back to the text tonight where Rinpoche says, sense perceptions are regarded as sacred. So we are meditating. We're attempting to be totally aware of the present, and we know that the machine guns of our mind are constantly going, and ideas are popping in. And let's talk about mental sense perceptions, where we recollect harm that we have caused to someone, and we feel remorse, or how we've been generous, and we feel pleasant. And this is natural, it's inevitable. And I think what Michael was attempting to encourage us to do was realize you're doing that and not dwell on it. But what I'm getting at is, if we are basically good, the recollection and the instantaneous evaluation of either remorse or joy is basically good. And it is not necessarily to be rejected. It's not to be dwelled in, but it's there and is a source, if you will, for appreciation of our role as human beings. That's.
Thank you, Ed. Michael, do you have any comment on that? Remorse and joy?
Well, I'll just say that the Shambhala teachings, the Vajrayana as a whole, have a whole different outlook on sense perceptions. I mean, just to step out of the Shambhala world for a moment and talk about it in terms of Buddhism, on a basic Hinayana level, when we're working with trying to tame the mind and deal with distraction, it's very easy to see sense perceptions as a distraction and something that we want to overcome. But at this level, we're dealing with it in a whole different way. There's a famous in Buddhist world, famous line, instruction that Tilopa gave Naropa, where he said, Naropa, it's not your perceptions, it's not appearances that bind you, it's your attachment to appearances that bind you. So the idea here is we're letting go, by not engaging, we're able to let go of our attachment, and then we can see things as they actually are. The problem is, so long as, when we're distracted or when we approach our perceptions with, ordinary conceptual mind, we're not really seeing things at all. That's why we can do things like drive and end up in a place and have no recollection of how we got there. I mean, obviously we're awake enough to get there, but we're completely in our heads and not really paying that much attention to what we're doing. So it's learning to let go of our attachments to these things that allow us to actually see them as they actually are.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I put it to you as well that there's a big difference between remorse and joy. Remorse has to do with dwelling in stories and conceptual frameworks, regret about what I did, memories of the past. Very selective, very selective. You pick out some little items from the past that you remember and then you regret. Whereas joy is a feature of enlightened mind. And they talk about great joy at some point. And it comes from relaxing into this cosmic mirror and the beauty of it and the way it arises and passes away so constantly, expressing itself with appreciation and pleasure. And this joy that they talk about isn't necessarily my joy. It's more a property of the field of awareness of the beauty of this field. Whatever you're looking at. Could be a dog shit in the street, as Rinpoche used to say. And that beauty can still be there, that vividness of the moment of awareness in anything. Anything. Tony.
John, thank you. And, I often wondered why, when I felt wrapped a little too tight, that I would cook and it would relax me. And now I've read this chapter. I read the chapter that Michael talked about, Nowness, because what it did was, the cooking really put me in the now is what it did. I was there in the very present moment. And the anxiety or whatever I was feeling was dissipated, That's the first thing that's come up for me this evening. The second thing is, I remember talking to someone who was a bit of a scholar of Tibetans and Buddhism many years ago, and he said, you would never hear a Tibetan complain about their mother. I thought, that's a pretty good point. And as time's gone on, they don't complain about their mothers either, not like we often do in the Western world. It's a bit of a predilection for people. But the third thing which interests me, there's a paragraph here in Discovering Magic on page 100 where he talks about, in order to rediscover nowness, you have to look back to where you came from, back to the original state. In this case, looking back is not looking back in time, looking back into your own mind, etc., etc., etc. It really reminded me in many ways of the ideas of Carl Jung also, who talked about the collective unconscious, and sort of genetic memory. And it just refreshed. Both these chapters are just sort of ticking a lot of different boxes for me. And I'm sure that Rinpoche would have loved to have met Carl Jung. Those guys were really on the same page in many ways. So again, thank you very much for such a great talk this evening. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And as you speak, I think about you and your art and the joy that I'll bet it brings you as you create something beautiful. Yeah. And that's one way of entering into the magic.
You become one with the thing is what happens. You become one with it. As he says, he talks about, he doesn't reject the bad, negative branch. He sort of incorporates it.
Yeah.
That's what happens with art as well,
Yeah.
Art is succeeding with your failures. Thank you.
Thank you. It again? No. It's not an old one.
I'll go ahead, Miriam.
Oh, thank you. My question has to do with the person who was just raising the similarity between Carl Jung and I believe you were referring to the archetypes or the collective unconscious, that genetic inheritance of something, and the similarity with what the reading was about with Trungpa Rinpoche's views, and I don't know that I see it. I thought that Rinpoche was wiping out all notions of predetermined states, like the cosmic mirror seems to really take away. In fact, I was thinking this while we were just like reading tonight. It's wiping out the idea of myths or stories that we all have as human beings. It's kind of beyond that. And I'm having a bit of a hard time reconciling them, although there might be some connection. So I guess I'm asking Tony for clarification on what he meant with the correspondence between Jung and Trungpa Rinpoche.
Let me just get the book again. Yeah, I've become very aware in the last so many years I've been in recovery that I have almost what you would call a non-specific, almost a genetic memory in a way. It's not specific. It doesn't sort of remember specific things. But when I'm trying to find the actual page here that he talks about this. Okay, he says, Trungpa Rinpoche says, in order to rediscover nowness, you have to look back to where you came from, back to the original state. In this case, looking back is not looking back in time, going back several thousand years. It is looking back into your own mind to before history began, before thinking began, before thought ever occurred. When you are in contact with this original ground, then you are never confused by the illusions of past and future. You are able to rest continuously in nowness. You know, I related that really to Jung's idea of collective unconscious of genetic memory. You know, let me read here. The collective unconscious is a term introduced by Carl Jung to represent a form of the unconscious, that part of the mind containing memories and impulses of which the individual is not aware, common to mankind as a whole and originating in the inherited structure of the brain. So, you know, it may be a tenuous connection, but I saw a relationship between both of those things. They were both non-specific, but it was about going back into almost our genetic memory to sort of conjure up a sense of nowness. That's where I'm coming from. Is that making some sense to you?
He's talking about Trungpa Rinpoche, about the fact that reality, as it arises in this present moment, is consciousness, and it has no history and no future. It's timeless. In the Dzogchen teachings, they talk about the fourth moment, beyond past, present, and future. It's not really even a moment. In these teachings, he's talking about the cosmic mirror of pure awareness. It's very much different, I think, than Carl Jung's idea of an unconscious, or Freud's idea of an unconscious. Both of them, while Jung speaks of universal, Freud didn't, but both of them are talking about that aspect of the mind that acts as a storehouse for our memories, which then condition the mind and which spring to life and condition the way we perceive the world. This has nothing to do with that. In Buddhism, that's called the storehouse consciousness, the Alaya Vijnana, the storehouse consciousness. And this is way beyond that. This has to do with only in this present moment, right now. No idea of memory or recollection that's going to condition the way we see the world, it's coming into utter, complete newness and freshness of this present moment. In the Shambhala teachings, it's been called the cosmic mirror. In the Great Perfection teachings, they call this pure awareness. In the Nyingma tradition, they call it Nishta, which is Vidya in Sanskrit. And it's this pure, unconditioned, timeless awareness that is the core, according to Buddhism, of our very being. So I think it's somewhat different than the Freudian or Jungian ideas of the unconscious, which contain memory. But we're getting off the subject here. Anybody else have things that they want to bring up?
Valerie?
Thank you. This reminds me of Joseph Campbell, Power of Myth and the Hero's Journey. A lot of this just makes me want to revisit that. That was 34 years ago. He was teaching that stuff. Anyways, that's all.
The Hero of a Thousand Faces. And I've been writing a memoir. It's funny. And in it, I've just described Rinpoche's first trip to California to give teachings, and how after San Francisco, we went to LA, where Joseph Campbell had given Trungpa Rinpoche and all of us who were traveling with him his home to stay in. He wasn't there. This beautiful house in the suburbs somewhere of Los Angeles, I can't remember. And we all stayed in Joseph Campbell's house. I don't know how that happened. Funny.
It's interesting, John, you mentioned fourth moment, because I was thinking about that in regard to nowness. And the basic idea of fourth moment is we have, obviously past, present, and future. And our idea of the present is often relative to our ideas of past and future.
Yeah.
And fourth moment is beyond all of that. And there's a really good quote about it, actually from the Path of Indestructible Wakefulness, which I'll read. The first three moments are the past, present, and future. And then there is a fourth moment that transcends all three. This moment is a pure moment that is not connected with what you have missed, what you are experiencing, or what you expect to happen. The fourth moment is a pure state of consciousness. It is clear and pure and free from habitual tendencies. That's utter nowness.
It's what?
Utter nowness.
The cosmic mirror.
The cosmic mirror.
Which is our very nature. All of us. We're all living in the cosmic mirror. Well, perhaps we should end. What do you think?
It's 9 o'clock. You have two hands up.
It is. Okay. Michael, you want to lead the chants? I'll put them up.
Okay.
All right.
Discussion group tomorrow night.
Right. Discussion group tomorrow night. Prepare. Magic. Let's see.
Okay, so we'll close by reciting a prayer for peace and then dedicating the merit generated through our practice, study, and understanding for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Michael.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
Michael.
day.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, John. Thanks,
Thanks,
Michael.
everyone.
Great.
Good night,
Closing
everyone.
that-
Thank you all
closing
so
it.
much.
Night.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Mary.
Bye.